Today we're going to have our first installment of a storytelling series that we call Arch Stories. Now, the way Arch Stories works, it's pretty simple. We have 7 storytellers who tell 7-minute stories on a theme. Our theme today is persistence, perseverance, and progress. What is your color on the spectrum? And this is in service to Choose Blue and autism awareness. So we have storytellers of various types who have experience with people on the spectrum or on the spectrum, telling their personal tales. These are real stories, these are real people. You're going to hear, they're spilling their hearts out, so I hope you're very welcoming to them. But before we start, I need to welcome a couple people and acknowledge them. First off, I want to acknowledge Cindy Weimold, Executive Director of Faith, Hope, and Charity in Storm Lake. Here's Cindy. And secondly, I want to acknowledge Terry Johnson, CEO of Genesis Development, which is a statewide agency right here. I also want to bring to the stage our honorary chair people. First is Fred Moore. Please come up. Fred is, as I'm sure you know, president of Buena Vista University, and he's my boss, so he's watching me. And also his lovely wife, Susan Moore, who is backstage. Aha, the big reveal. They are the honorary co-chairs of the festivities this weekend, and really a big asset to the community, and we want to thank them for all they've done for Buena Vista and for Storm Lake. Okay. And Susan's backstage because she's one of our storytellers. So without further ado, what I want to do is bring out our storytellers. Come on out. Okay, now let me just tell you a little bit more about how this works. I'm going to have 2 items with me, not exactly props, or more tools. And one is a bell, you might be able to see it sitting over in the stage, and the other is going to be my very high-tech timer, otherwise known as an iPhone 7. And at 6 minutes into the story, or into each story I should say, I'm going to ring the bell lightly, just so that the storyteller knows we're getting toward the end. After 7 minutes, I might ring the bell a little louder. We go much beyond that, I might get a little crazy with the bell, so watch for that. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first storyteller. Our first storyteller is Michelle Grant. She was born in Nova Scotia, Canada. Michelle earned a Bachelor of Arts from Acadia University and has since earned an honorary degree in chaos management, motherhood, autism spectrum disorders, and ADHD through an extensive unpaid fellowship and on-the-job training. When not fulfilling her role as a household engineer, Michelle enjoys reading, shopping, learning to play the piano, organizing social gatherings, serving in the community at church, and traveling to visit family. So, Michelle.
Thank you. Shortly before his 3rd birthday, several significant events occurred in the life of our son, Evan. The first was that after years of trying, he had finally managed to escape from our home undetected. Secondly, he got to ride in a state police car. And thirdly, he spoke his first real sentence without quoting a movie, storybook, or echoing us. "Dad," he said to his father, "I really like the black police car." This small miracle of spontaneous speech was almost lost, as the diligent officer reminded us that as parents we had a responsibility to keep a more watchful eye on our child. It was amusing to see the officer's transition from giving us, the neglectful parents, a stern warning, to increasing panic as his attention turned to our son, who, left unattended in the front seat of the patrol car, was now gleefully pressing every button he could access, including the officer's onboard computer. Thus quickly ended our roadside parenting class as the officer expelled Evan from the car while tersely repeating to us, "Keep a better watch on your son." Fast forward several months, we were once again asked to keep a watch on our son. This time it came with pages and pages of paperwork as specialists were invited by Evan's preschool teachers to come and observe our son's behavior and development. After their 2-hour visit, we were then asked to complete multiple forms and questionnaires and to recall development milestones in our son's life. In the midst of this paper frenzy, my husband, a newly minted family doctor, quietly remarked to me, "Michelle, they are looking for autism." Well, we found it. Let me now take a few minutes to share what else we found. We found that while it was a relief to have a name for what we were observing, it also came at great cost, personal and financial. I felt like I had to learn everything about autism that I could because I had to educate everyone Evan came in contact with. There was just so little information. The only experience with autism I had had before Evan's diagnosis was watching the 1988 movie Rain Man, and Evan was definitely no Dustin Hoffman or Charlie Babbitt, the character Hoffman played. From the point of view of our insurance company, we found it was a nightmare to have any recommended treatments covered, including the diagnosis. With effort, I had found a therapist who would focus on Evan's delayed speech and echolalia. However, our insurance company refused to pay for speech therapy because, they said, "You have health insurance and autism doesn't affect your health." To which I replied, "Autism is a neurological disorder. If there's something wrong with your brain, I assume it will affect your health." They hung up on me. So we paid for speech therapy. Then we found out how difficult it was to access services that were supposed to help families when we applied for the ill and handicapped waiver, which would offset costs not covered by insurance. After waiting a year, we then received notice that we were not, in fact, eligible to qualify for the waiver, as we are not yet citizens of the U.S., did not have a green card, nor had we been in the country for the requisite 5 years. I pointed out to our case manager that they hadn't waited 5 years to take my tax money that I was being denied access to. Which actually funded the waiver I was being denied access to. Her response, she shrugged, tore up my application, and sent me on my way. So we installed at our own expense a tall fence around our backyard, as well as an alarm system, which was triggered whenever someone opened a door to our home, including my poor husband, who was called out at all hours to deliver babies. We also hired a high school student to come to our home for 10 hours a week to provide social interaction for our son with someone other than a family member. We continued this practice well into high school. Once he entered the public school system, we found some teachers that were as rigid as Evan was. One such teacher rather angrily commented to me, "It wasn't fair to the other children if Evan got to do things differently than they did." I quickly pointed out it wasn't fair that Evan had autism and the other children didn't. I had always planned to be a stay-at-home mom. Truthfully, I really don't know how I would have returned to the workplace with the demands of having a child with autism. I was on call 24 hours a day. I panicked every time the phone rang, wondering what had happened or if he had taken off again. I received one such call while Evan was still in elementary school. He had bolted from the classroom and disappeared, and they wondered if he had come home because we only lived 2 blocks from the school. After much searching, he was later found in a deserted office enjoying the air conditioning. Another time, he unexpectedly walked in the door of our home shortly after lunch. Surprised to say the least, I asked him what he was doing home so early. He replied that he had come home because he was sick. I asked him where his teacher was. "Running about 500 yards behind me," was his answer. Later in middle school, he was absent for almost 40 days, and I found myself in the role of teacher. Evan asked if he could remain at home for the rest of the year. I told him it was an option, but there were 2 foreseeable problems. One, I had received my education in Canada, and my knowledge of U.S. geography, history, and social studies was weak. Evan agreed. I also pointed out that there was no way I could teach him math, his favorite subject, as he was so advanced. He acquiesced and willingly went back to school the next day. High school offered new challenges, too many to number, as he transitioned yet again into a building that would be under construction for the remaining of his time there. Surprisingly, Evan sought out his own advocates in the form of the vice principal, the school nurse, and his resource teacher. Excuse me. On previous occasions, I would have been called to come and pick him up, but now he found allies to support him, and after taking a break, he would readily return to the classroom. This wasn't always the case, though, as demonstrated by a phone call I received from the principal, who hadn't had many dealings with their son. I was asked to come and pick Evan up as he was done for the day. Really? It was only 8:15. Okay. I'm still grateful to the policeman who brought Evan safely home to us and gave us the charge to keep a watch on our son. I'd like to tell him we have and will continue to do so. We watched him successfully navigate life on the spectrum, graduate high school with honors, and pass his driver's education test. We've watched him this past year as he began university here at BV on both an academic and a performing arts scholarship. Thank you all for watching with us.
Thank you, Michelle. Our next storyteller is Brandon Arklin. Brandon is a senior at Iowa State University, majoring in child, adult, and family services. He is currently on the board of directors of Autism Society of Iowa. Brandon is the co-chair of the Iowa Autism State Council. The council advises the state legislature and governor, producing topical reports. Brandon.
All right, thank you all for being here. So my story is, it was the spring of 2014, spring semester of my senior year of high school, and I was taking an AP public speaking course through our community college in my hometown of Webster City, and it was nearing the end of the semester, so we had to make a final paper. Could be over anything we wanted, our professor told us. And I was having a really hard time thinking about what to talk about. And my professor at the time had been good friends with my family and he knew that I was on the spectrum. And so he told me, Brandon, why don't you write about autism? And I asked him, why that? Like, what's so special about that? And he said, well, you have a lot more experience that a lot of people don't know about. You could really, give people insight onto this topic. And so as I was writing, I thought about this and I was like, I have never been given an opportunity to really self-disclose myself to other people about being on the spectrum. And so I'm writing about this, and the more I'm writing, the more I'm realizing that I can really make a difference with what I choose to put in this speech. And so the time came for the speech, and I stepped in front of all my peers, and at the time, almost everyone in my class was taking this public speaking class. And so some of the people who might have bullied me in high school, others who might have just taken advantage of me from having autism and maybe not being that great at social skills and whatnot. A lot of these people were in that class. And so I stepped in front of everyone and, I'm telling my speech. And a lot of what my speech consisted of was what autism is and what it's like to live the life of someone with autism, especially in just a normal day at the high school. I gave examples of how I had been maybe picked on, treated, emotionally abused. And as I'm looking around at all these faces, I'm seeing emotions of regret, facial expressions from people, really realizing that, wow, what I did was wrong. And the more I get into it, I started talking about how, a lot of these people need to accept autism for what it is. It's not something you cure. It's not something you try to change. It's something you need to try to adapt to, because a lot of times, especially with people with autism, it's really hard to ask for that help. And so if someone can extend their help, it's going to make the difference in the world for them. And so after I got done with my speech, people would come up to me, my peers, my teachers. A lot of them said, I never really knew this about you. I never knew what kind of harm happened. And a lot of other people said, I'm really proud that you stood up like this, because a change needed to happen, something needed to be said. And so after that, I graduated, and I was about to attend community college, Iowa Central, near my hometown. I was just curious because I was like, I kind of like speaking. So I looked up autism events in Iowa, and I came across the Autism Society of Iowa having this event in Des Moines at the Capitol. Told them who I was, and they invited me to just come tell my story. So after that, went to the Capitol, told my story, and they asked me to be a board director. And shortly thereafter, they asked me to publicly speak on their behalf at a lot of events as an advocate. And shortly thereafter that, I spoke at the Capitol yet again, and someone on the state council just asked if it would be something I'm interested in. Didn't really know what it was at the time. And they appointed me to it. I accepted by Governor Branstad. And then shortly thereafter that, this spring, they elected me as co-chair of the state council. And as the youngest member, as the youngest co-chair and the youngest member by 10 years, feels pretty good. But what my speech that one day, from just my professor reaching out and giving me help, it made me realize from just that one speech that I really can have an impact on people. I can help people. I can spread awareness about autism through my own personal experiences, and just made me realize I can make a difference. I can make a change. Because a lot of the times, if you think that you can make a change but you don't do it, you got to think, who else is really gonna? And so, yeah, just that's my speech, that's my story, and thank you all for coming out.
Talk about beating the bell. So thank you, Brandon. And I just realized I left my piece of paper over there. Excuse me. I don't have these memorized. I just got them. So our next storyteller is Rebecca Bassish. Rebecca is 27 years old and the oldest of 6 children. She graduated from Buena Vista University with an art degree in 2015 and currently resides in her hometown of Malvern, Iowa, with her mother, 2 siblings, and Trixie, the family dog. Rebecca enjoys working within the exciting career field of public library services as the local library director for Malvern Public Library. Rebecca.
Perseverance. What does it mean? For those of us who know autism, you and I both know it intimately and that it colors the very fabric of our lives. Enter Henry, my baby brother. Now 19, his journey in learning to communicate with others started all over again when he was just shy of 3 years. What do I mean by starting again? Well, I can remember as a young girl, my brother talking, giggling, babbling, much like my other brothers and sisters did his age, and going through all the normal stages of development. His favorite song to sing was patty cake, baker's man. And then one day, my mom noticed something. Henry would take a crayon, rolling it very, very intently in front of his eyes, just like this, fixated. That was when she knew. And then the diagnosis came. Then the head banging, the flapping of the arms, the humming. My baby brother lost his voice. I'm sorry. The real hell began with preschool. My brother entered preschool at the same age any other child would, and it was very hard to watch my mother crumble and to see my baby brother cry and scream every morning as he got on the bus, not wanting to go to school. Well, things escalated rather quickly. One day, my brother came home from school and there was a bruise on his little spine. Like a good mother, my mother decided to pay a surprise visit to the classroom. What I found out after school that day devastated me. It devastated our whole family. When she walked in, my brother was strapped to a lap tray chair in front of a television, not being interacted with. Staff were completely ignoring him. The rest of the class resumed as is typical. My mother confronted the teacher and asked, "Where is the one-to-one that was hired exclusively for Henry?" Their response, "Well, Henry is disruptive and we need her for the other students." This is the kind of ignorance and indifference that we have had to face from day one. Different schools end up with the same situation, as is customary in many cases like my brother's, because he is quote-unquote nonverbal. It's hard to tell these stories, but what's even more difficult is telling it to people who don't seem to believe you or don't want to hear. My mother is the embodiment of perseverance. She is the only person through all of this hardship that can take credit for the learning my brother has accomplished in his learning to write, to express his needs and wants through writing and sign language. She's the only person. Persistence. I see it so plainly in my brother's desire to communicate, to make that human connection. You know, that word nonverbal, it's as alien a concept to my brother as a world without ice cream would be to me. You know, that word doesn't apply to him. He may not be able to form words, but you'd be kidding yourself if you don't think he wants to talk to you, and he will. Whether it's through his communication device, through writing, through sign language, through his vocalizations, there is no denying the intelligence that is there. He has a voice, and if you even so much as look at him from across the room, you'd better believe he'll come talk to you for 20 minutes about Beavis and Butthead, whether you like it or not. He is the loudest and most persistent voice among the Bassage kids, and I wouldn't have it any other way. He doesn't care that the doctors tell my mother and us that he has the IQ of a 3-year-old. Henry is so persistent in just being himself with you and so intelligent in making that connection with others that there is just no denying how intelligent my brother is. If you want an example, my brother and I, we have at least one conversation every day dedicated to the weather outside, his favorite Star Wars characters' impersonations, one after the other, and then eating dinner and having Pepsi Pop. I think my brother and I have some of the most interesting conversations in the world. Progress. I think it's something we're fighting for in every waking moment. But what are we fighting for exactly? Well, I'm willing to bet it's the same thing everyone in this room want for themselves as well as their loved ones, and that is simply to be acknowledged and to be accepted for who you are. You want to belong. You don't want to be characterized by a set of perceived imperfections or to be seen as lesser than. You don't want blind acceptance either. You just want to be known for the whole person that you are and embraced. And isn't that what we all want? I realize that progress means something different for everyone in this room. For me, progress means something very specific. When you see a 6'2" man running headlong toward a stranger in the supermarket, grab them on the wrist, and then show them his list about Pop, Pepsi, Disney, Pixar, progress is seeing that person on the other end of the conversation, make that connection with him, look him in the eye, and smile and talk back instead of withdrawing or recoiling in fear. You see, I think that's one of the things I love most about my brother, is that he is fearless, and he will come up to you and make a conversation with you regardless of what you look like, and he will be your friend. He is fearless, and you see, he just naturally brings out the best in people, including myself. In fact, I think that's something we can all aspire to. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rebecca. Let me tell you a little bit about Chase. Chase is a senior music production and technology major at Buena Vista University, where he is an active member of the KBVU, the Edge 97.5 team, the BVU concert band, and the BVU jazz ensemble. Chase is also a composer. Chase is an alumnus of the highly competitive Disney College program, where he worked for Disney World in Orlando, Florida. In addition to telling a story for us, as you know, Chase is providing our musical entertainment. So, Chase, please.
When I was a kid, I went on journeys in my mind. See, the real world was inconsistent and scary, and in my head, everything was straight lines, and I was a hero, and I got to save the day. So it makes sense then that I got really into Disney really early on. I went to Disney World for the first time when I was 4 years old, and when I was there, I got to meet the Seven Dwarves, and the Seven Dwarves, I just instantly gravitated towards them, and it was the moment that I felt really connected to something for the first time. So, when I'm into anything, obsessed with anything, the first thing I do is I just obsessively research it. So when I was about like 7 or 8, when I was in like when I was like 3rd or 4th grade, I read my first biography of Walt Disney, and I immediately became obsessed with the way he looked at the world, his philosophy, all the things that he did, all the things that he created, all the things that he allowed to happen because of the work that he did when he was alive. And it really gave me the inspiration to be a part of something. So in the book, they talked a lot about Imagineers. So I instantly became really into Imagineers. Imagineers are the people who help design the parks, who help every time you see a ride, every time you see a restaurant, every time you see a store when you're at a Disney theme park, was designed by an Imagineer. So because that was just the job that you heard the most about, that's what I wanted to be. So there are notebooks at home full of rides that I designed, and shops, and like restaurants, and all these things that I thought would be great in a Disney theme park. I grew older, I became interested in music. I sort of didn't move away from Disney, but my interests shifted. I wanted to be a musician, I wanted to be a producer, I wanted to do stuff relating to music because that was my new passion. So that sort of Imagineer thing kind of faded into the back of my mind. When I was a freshman at BVU here, I went on the Disney trip, which was a really cool thing that Jerry Johnson and Henry Hart put on here, where they take you to Disney World and they show, and you get, in addition to just getting to go to the parks, they also have sort of informative things that they do with you, such as you got to meet with some Disney radio personalities. You got to meet with we met with a Disney historian. The one that really stuck with me more than any other one, though, was we went to the Tri-Circle D Ranch, which is the ranch at Fort Wilderness. That they have, that is where they keep the horses, all the horses that are throughout the resort, the Walt Disney World Resort. So we got to meet a BVU alumni who actually works with the horses there, but she talked about how when her start with the company had been doing a thing called the Disney College Program. Now, I'd heard of the Disney College Program before, but it had been just like a couple paragraphs in a book I'd read a long time ago, so it wasn't really something that was at the forefront of my mind, but she talked about it, and I was instantly like, yes, sign me up. So it was an act of kind of fulfilling a dream, I suppose. That summer, I worked at Adventureland in Des Moines, and there I worked with Bernie Bernard and Toby the Tiger and all of the sort of costume characters that they have there. And I really fell in love with sort of getting lost in a character, becoming like I wasn't personally Bernie Bernard or anything, but I was always with them, and I was their voice, and I got to help them with photos. I got to do all sorts of cool stuff involving that. So it sort of really cemented for me that what I loved was getting to interact with people, which is a surprise because in person I can be kind of standoffish. I can kind of seem that way. But when I got into that mode of just trying to please guests, all of a sudden all that faded away. So when the beginning of my junior year, I applied for the Disney College Program in Orlando that takes place in Orlando, Florida, and I was accepted. It's a highly competitive program. About 40,000 people apply, about 4,000 get in, so it was very exciting to get to do that. And I was accepted as a character attendant, which was pretty much what I did at Adventureland. So I was very excited for that. I got to go down there starting in January of 2016. It was a kind of a culture shock because I never lived that far away from home and lived in like a very unfamiliar environment. I didn't know my roommates before I was going to go down there. I was a slave to this very patchwork bus system that took their employees around the resort. It was a really interesting experience, but I found passion, I found appreciation in doing character attending. I got to see so many things that just most people don't get to see, and you get to see all these moments one after the other. And it's interesting because the things that made me weird, the things that are kind of go with being on the autism spectrum, all of a sudden, those made me a good cast member. They made me a good cast member. For instance, I have a really loud voice. I have a really naturally loud voice, and people always be telling me to shush or stop being so excited, you're talking really loud. But when you're at Disney and there's a parade going on 5 feet away from you, you still need to be spieling to your guests, please do make sure you folks have those autograph books open and ready to page that you want Daisy to sign. It was really useful to really be able to talk loud like that. And having like an obsessive knowledge of the parks was so vital. You're able to do maps and you're able to like have a map of the park in your head. It really helps out. But there's one specific story that helped me, that really cemented why I love Disney and why it's so great. When I was working with Donald and Daisy at the front of Disney's Hollywood Studios, and a family came up, it was a couple kids, and they had one in a stroller, and she wasn't talking much, and she had a Donald and Daisy doll. She was holding it, and she was very quiet, and they said that she was on the autism spectrum, and but they were worried that she wanted to see Donald and Daisy, but she was worried that they wouldn't be able to handle the line. So I collaborated with my other character attendant that day, and I talked to my manager, and I made sure we got her right up to Donald and Daisy. We made sure she got to skip the line and got to see Donald and Daisy right then. And she was really quiet at first. She was kind of sort of hiding in the back of her stroller, but Donald and Daisy went up to her and kind of pointed at the dolls and pointed at themselves, and they got up and got out, and they had a really awesome interaction. And in that moment, I realized that was me. That was when I needed something, to latch on to, when I needed something to think about, Disney was there for me. And now I got to help make sure Disney was there for someone else. Isn't that cool? So that really had a big impact on me, and I've really rethought kind of what I want to do with my life. And now this June after I graduate, I'm going to actually be heading back down to Disney World to hopefully work there forever and to be able to provide those same memories, to continue to create that same magic that I needed in my life at that moment, that I needed. I want to make sure that everyone else who needs that gets that too. So thank you guys so much. I'm going to go play some songs now.
Well, I'm happy to introduce our next storyteller, Aurora Post. Aurora is a 23-year-old ambassador for public speaking for the Special Olympics Global Messenger Program. She received her ambassador training in December 2015 and has been an avid speaker ever since. She balances working part-time and her ambassador role. Aurora has been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and seeks to show the ability in people with intellectual challenges. Aurora, please.
When I was little, I wasn't very talkative. I was very shy. But my social skills grew over time. My grandpa was the pastor at the Fremont United Methodist Church in Fremont, Nebraska, and I used to help him greet out at his church the weekends that I helped him at church. People got to know me, I got to know them, and I was very involved in the school district during school, managing sports. And one day during school, I was pushed out of one of my English classes to be put on a panel to speak about what it's like living with intellectual disability and what it's like. It was very nerve-wracking at first because I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what it was going to be about. Then the teacher noticed I was very confused, so she pushed me back out. We talked about, again, what it was going to be like, what I was going to be talking about. Luckily, I wasn't the only one on the panel at the time, and my mom was with me too, so she was able to help me out and fill in answers when I couldn't get the words out. But I felt at that time very proud to be able to be a public speaker and tell others what it's like living with intellectual disability and what it's like going through school, because as an individual with an intellectual disability, it can be very challenging. But since I was confused, luckily my friend popped her head out, and I was able to focus on her and be able to stay calm at the time. And I felt at that moment that there was a place out there for me, and I knew it was going to come very, very fast. But in December of 2015, I took the Global Messenger Training Program for Special Olympics Iowa, and ever since that moment, it changed my whole life. I've been able to go out into the community and speak about what it's like living with an intellectual disability, and what it's like. I've been able to inspire people over time, and they've been able to follow in my footsteps. And I'm working part-time right now at Fairway as a courtesy clerk, but as an ambassador, it's amazing to show others that even though we have an intellectual disability, we can do things just like everybody else because we are just like everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you, Aurora. I love hearing these stories about teachers pushing people to their abilities. And that's what we do here at BV, and that's what great teachers do everywhere. Our next storyteller is Leslie Franzmeyer. Leslie is the autism strategist for Prairie Lakes AEA and a special education consultant. She received her Master of Arts from Morningside College, for which we will forgive her, and is a graduate of University of Northern Iowa. Leslie has been a special education teacher for 30 years. She now advocates for services for children with a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. She is a grandmother to Cecilia and has 2 married children. Leslie's husband farms. Leslie, please.
Good afternoon. The story I'd like to share with you today is about my first student that I had that was diagnosed with autism. You always remember your first. Stephen was gentle and kind. I taught in a small town near here. I was unprepared for my first child with autism, I'll be honest. I had attended a college in the 80s, and I remember specifically in the special education textbook, there was a paragraph about that big on autism, and the term refrigerator mothers was used to explain why autism existed. I remember clearly in the textbook there was a black and white picture of a mother holding her infant child, looking into the distance. The child was crying, as if to say to the reader, this mother is a refrigerator mother. She's too cold, uncaring. She has not bonded with her child. Well, I knew that to be a myth. My two very best and dearest friends from high school both had boys with autism. They were the kindest, caring, most nurturing mothers you'd ever want to meet, and they were very instrumental in helping me get ready for Stephen and the challenges that entailed. So the first thing we needed to do was get a visual schedule ready for Stephen, because I knew through my support system, my friends, that children on the spectrum learn best through the visual methods. So we took pictures of where Stephen would have math, where he would have reading, etc., and we created a visual schedule in a linear fashion that helped to bring some predictability to his day, helped to ease his anxiety. We knew we needed to hire an additional adult to be with him. I couldn't be with him all day, and he was nonverbal. He was in second grade, so there were times that he needed that extra support. One huge hurdle we had to overcome was the lunchroom. As you remember from your days in elementary school, the lunchrooms can be very chaotic, very overwhelming, overstimulating, noise, traffic. So we began a lunch bunch group at the back of the room, and it was away from the traffic, away from the noise, the chaos. I got Stephen in there. I noticed a pattern was developing. I had never had such a picky eater, and I had never had that occasion to be with such a picky eater. I've never met a food I didn't like. So I couldn't really relate to that, but I had to go zen and just let that go. He had the same thing every day. It was white bread with butter, cheese balls, and for dessert, gummy bears, nothing to drink. And so we also invited a couple other of the second graders back to help with his social skills. He could at that point respond to yes and no, and he would kind of laugh at some of our conversations. And I also wanted the other children in second grade to see that even though Stephen had had a meltdown at 11 o'clock, at 12 o'clock he was okay. They needed to see that things were back to normal, crisis averted, and to practice their friendship skills. Another strategy that I was able to cultivate and pick up on was that Stephen needed lots of modeling. So the additional adult would sit in my reading groups with me and him and model what needed to be done, hand over hand. She would direct his hand. And there were definitely some tasks that Stephen did not like. But he was obsessed with maps. And he drew the most beautiful, intricate maps you'd ever want to see. I had driven to this town and taught there for about 10 years at this point. I still didn't know the street names. I knew where the grocery store was. But these maps were just phenomenal. For a second grade child to be able to visualize that detail and put it on paper was phenomenal. So to get him to do these tasks that he didn't really want to do, we would do the first then. And so first he was required to do what we needed him to do, and then he could spend time drawing. And he liked to carry that book with him everywhere he went. It was his comfort. I'm not sure what happened to Stephen. He was only with me for approximately 8 months, But in the ensuing 20 years, I had many students on the spectrum in my classroom. I like to tell people that I learned way more from them than they ever learned from me. When I was given the opportunity to join Prairie Lakes AEA as the autism consultant, I was thrilled to have an opportunity to spend my twilight years in a career that I am still learning more and more about. I had the honor of going into classrooms and helping teachers create toolboxes for kids on the spectrum. And I feel like I'm giving something back to Stephen and all the kids that I've had over the years that have touched my life. Thank you for your time. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you, Leslie. Another example of a teacher who pushes students to their abilities. And another great sign of a great teacher is a teacher who learns as much or more than his or her students. So our final storyteller is Susan Moore. Susan is an ordained minister with the United Church of Christ. She received her Master of Divinity from Duke University and is a graduate of the University of North Carolina. Much of her time in Storm Lake has been dedicated to the supportive role of serving as Buena Vista University President Fred Moore's wife, as mother to Allison, and as mother and primary caretaker of the Moore's 26-year-old son, Stephen, who is diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Susan has also been an active volunteer in Storm Lake and surrounding communities. Susan, please.
Good afternoon. My story today is about broken promises. And by that I mean not the literal kind, but the things we are brought up to believe in our culture, that if you do certain things well, if you make good choices, then pretty much things will go your way. Our son Stephen was born in May of 1990, a beautiful boy. I remember him when he was around 1.5, running around, and he had this cute little shirt with the yellow top and blue, so he was a beaver early on. Had little blue tennis shoes. Should have been a sign when he took those off and started carrying them around with him everywhere. We thought it was cute, but anyway, Stephen was diagnosed on the autism spectrum when he was 3 by his pediatrician, Dr. Kennard, when we were in North Carolina, and he said to me, "Ms. Moore, I think he's showing some autistic type tendencies," and that put us on our road. Now, I'm calling this the first broken promise because in life, you kind of have that thought that everything's going to be okay, and then when it's not, it just really throws you for a loop. So, Stephen did really well from like 3 years old up through elementary school. He was very popular, especially with the girls, because he would let them show him here's how you color, Stephen, and it was great. The little boys would take him to get his medicine, and had wonderful teachers, and I'm not sure if she's still here, but Jan Wiggin was incredible with Stephen. So we thought, okay, he's going to be like this. And then when he graduates from high school, go get a job, group home, we'll have dinner on Sunday afternoons, everything will be great. Well, unfortunately, that leads us to another broken promise, which is that was not the way it was going to be. When Stephen turned about 11, 12 and went to middle school, he developed very serious, aggressive, violent, property destructive behaviors out of the blue. And obviously what we thought was the promise of his future had really taken a turn. So that's the second one. We knew at that time Stephen started hoarding. He refused to go to school. He would just sit and watch TV. And so we knew, and our doctors and experts told us we needed to do something else. So we found a wonderful place in Sioux Falls, and that was the toughest day of our lives to take our son there. But it was a great move, and he thrived there. I'll come back to that in a minute. Then the last broken promise is Stephen is now in a facility in Florida, which as an adult we needed to find something else, and we couldn't find anything else in the whole country that could deal with his kind of behaviors, because he's a wonderful kid. I don't mean to, I'm just telling you how it is. He's strong as an ox. He's now in his early 20s, and it takes 8 or 9 people to restrain Stephen just to get him in a rat mat where he's safe. So, we have just found out recently that the government, in its wisdom, has decided to not let facilities that have a beautiful campus setting and lots of staff, like is where Stephen is now, that they are called institutions. So, everyone who lives there, who has, a lot of them have these kinds of issues, has to be pigeonholed into a group home where it's great for some folks, don't get me wrong, but it will never work for our son. 2 staff. So, back to children's care. Stephen did great there after he adjusted about a year. So he went when he was 14 in 2004. They had a school. He loved it. Stephen was voted homecoming king. I mean, our daughter didn't even make the court. But Stephen was voted homecoming king, and our family was invited to make a video about what the great things that they are doing with autistic kids to show the board. Well, that was not to last, and that leads up to probably the worst betrayal and broken promise. When Stephen was about 20, again, even though he had really done so well and his behaviors were down, they came back when he was 20. And we're going, well, I better not say. We had an excellent applied behavior analyst named Jason who worked with Stephen and saw that he needed a different approach. So he was working on finding some passive restraints, like gloves on his hands or something that would really help him. And unfortunately, we got a call on May 16th, 1912, that said Stephen had had a behavior on Saturday morning. They were understaffed, and the police had been called. He had been put in handcuffs and strapped down to a gurney and taken to a Vera emergency room. So, we were scared. We didn't know what they would do. So, I got there, they suggested that we go to a hotel for the weekend, and I thought, okay, great, he'll go back Monday. Well, Monday came, and I called and said, could y'all pick him up, because I wasn't feeling well, and they said, well, you know, I think they're in a meeting right now. I'm like, okay. And then they dropped the bomb. We've decided not to readmit Stephen. And Fred and I talked with the head of the CEO and said, can you just give us a little time to find something? No, we can't handle him. It's a danger to others. So, this place that had been, we had a covenant with them They were wonderful. We were working together to help our son reach his potential, which he has a tremendous amount of. All of a sudden, said, we're done. So that was an injury that we're still recovering from. And we have hope for Stephen. We always have. But if you know that song by Israel, how do you say? Kanakale, Over the Rainbow with the ukulele. You know that song. When I hear that song, I think about Stephen over that rainbow, and he is whole, and he is healthy, and he is strong. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Now we all have that song in our heads, so thanks a lot. Well, I want to give another round of applause to our 7 storytellers. And so ends our first edition of Arch Stories. Watch for future performances of Arch Stories on different topics down the line.